Hey, welcome to Watchtower Finance. If you are new here, this is where we break down the financial concepts that actually drive business decisions. Not textbook stuff, but the things that come up in real meetings, real forecasts, and real conversations between operators and their finance teams. If you've been here before, welcome back. Now let's get into it. Your VP of Sales pulls up the pipeline report. $2 million in open opportunities. The team is feeling good about it, leadership is excited, and people start planning around that number. Hiring plans get accelerated, marketing budgets go up, product roadmap decisions get made. All of it anchored to that $2 million pipeline. Then 3 months later, you close 600K, not 2 million, not even in the neighborhood. And nobody can clearly explain what happened to the other 1.4 million. This happens all the time. And the thing is, the problem is usually not that your sales team was being dishonest. The problem is that the pipeline itself was giving everyone a misleading picture. And if you do not know how to read it properly, how to weight it, and how to pressure test it, you end up making real decisions based on a number that was never real to begin with. So why does this happen? Why is the raw pipeline number almost always wrong? There are a few reasons, and they tend to compound on each other. The first one is just optimism. Sales reps are naturally optimistic people. That is part of what makes them good at selling. But it also means they tend to leave deals in the pipeline longer than they probably should. A rep had a great first call 3 months ago. The prospect seemed really interested, and then they went quiet. The deal is still sitting in the pipeline as a 150K opportunity because nobody wants to be the person who removes it. What if they come back, right? So it stays and it inflates the number. The second issue is inconsistent staging. If your pipeline stages are not clearly defined, with specific criteria for what it takes to move from one stage to the next, then every rep is making their own judgment call about where a deal sits. And those judgment calls tend to lean optimistic. A prospect who said they are interested but has not identified a budget is very different from a prospect who has approval and a timeline. But in a loosely managed pipeline, those two deals might be sitting in the same exact stage. And the third one is that most pipelines have no weighting at all. A $200,000 deal that just had a first meeting and a $200,000 deal that is in contract review both show up as 200K. They both contribute to that headline number equally, even though one has maybe a 10% chance of closing and the other is closer to 90. When you add all of that up, what you get is a pipeline number that looks healthy, but is actually full of air. And when leadership plans around that inflated number, they are making real financial commitments based on revenue that is not coming when they think it is, or in some cases, not coming at all. If you want to understand what your pipeline is really worth, you need to look past the top line number. There are 3 metrics that tell you what is actually going on under the surface, and that's your win rate, your average deal size, and your sales cycle length. Let me walk through each one because each tell you something different. Win rate is the percentage of deals that enter your pipeline and actually end up closing. And this is where most companies fool themselves. If you ask a sales leader what their win rate is, they will usually say something like 30 or 40%. But when you actually run the math across all the opportunities that were created over the last 12 months, and you include the ones that went dark, the ones that got disqualified, the ones that just faded away, the real number is often closer to 15 or 20%, sometimes even lower than that. The gap exists because most people calculate win rate based on deals that made it to a certain stage. They exclude the early stalls, but those early stalls are part of the reality of your pipeline. And if you ignore them, you are overstating how much of that pipeline will actually convert. Average deal size tells you whether your pipeline is made up of a few large bets or a lot of smaller ones. And that matters more than people think. A pipeline full of enterprise deals that take 9 months to close behaves completely differently from a pipeline of small to medium-sized business deals that close in 3 weeks. The risk profile is different, the cash timing is different, and the way you plan around them has to be different too. And then there's sales cycle length, which that's the time dimension. It tells you how long it takes for a deal to go from qualified opportunity to signed contract. If your average cycle is 90 days, then the pipeline you were looking at right now is going to show up as a revenue this quarter. It is next quarter at the earliest, and if your billing terms add another 30 or 60 days on top of that, the actual cash is even further out. This ties directly back to what we talked about last time with the gap between bookings, billings, and revenue. The pipeline feeds bookings, but the timing between those events is where a lot of businesses get caught off guard. There's one formula that pulls all three of those metrics together into a single number. It is called pipeline velocity, and it tells you how much revenue is actually moving through your pipeline per day. The formula is straightforward. You take the number of qualified opportunities in your pipeline, multiply that by your win rate, multiply that by your average deal size, and then divide the whole thing by your average sales cycle length in days. Let's put some real numbers on that so it's not just abstract. Say you have 50 qualified opportunities in your pipeline right now. Your actual win rate when you run the numbers honestly across the last year is 20%. Your average deal size is $40K, and your average sales cycle from first qualified conversation to signed contract is about 75 days. So you take 50 times 20%, that gives you 10. Multiplied by 40K, that gets us 400 grand. And then divide by 75 days, and we get roughly 5,300 per day moving through your pipeline. Multiply that by the 90 days in a quarter, and you land at about 480,000 in expected revenue for the quarter. Now compare that to what the raw pipeline report says. If you have 50 deals at an average of 40K, the headline number is 2 million, but the velocity formula says the real output is closer to 480K. That's a 75% haircut from the number everyone was planning around. And that gap right there is where bad decisions get made, where companies hire too aggressively, spend too much on marketing, or make promises to the board they can't keep. What I like about this formula is that it also gives you 4 clear levers to pull. You can bring in more opportunities, you can improve your win rate through better qualification or better selling, you can increase average deal size by moving up market or bundling, or you can shorten the sales cycle by removing friction from the process. Each lever moves the velocity number, and when you think about it this way, your sales strategy becomes a math problem with clear inputs and outputs instead of a guessing game about who is going to close what by when. So now let's talk about how to weight your pipeline, because not every deal has the same probability of closing, and if you treat them all the same, the number you're working with is basically meaningless. There are 3 main approaches to weighting, and most companies should probably be using a combination of them rather than just one. The first and most common is stage-based weighting. This is what most CRMs default to. The idea is simple. You assign a probability to each stage of your sales process. So discovery might be 10%, meaning you expect about 1 in 10 deals at that stage to eventually close. Qualified and scoped might be 25%, proposal sent might be 50%, a verbal commit might be 75%, and contract out is usually 90%. Then you multiply each deal by its stage probability and add them all up, and that gives you a weighted pipeline value. Now the problem with stage-based weighting is that most companies just guess at the percentages. Someone set them up when they configured the CRM years ago, and nobody's updated them since. If your actual data shows that only 30% of deals at the proposal stage end up closing, but your CRM is set to 50%, then you're overweighting every single deal at that stage. The fix is pretty straightforward. Go back and run the actual numbers. Look at every deal that entered each stage over the last 12 months and track what percentages actually made it to closed won. Then update your stage probabilities to match what really happens, not what we hope happens. The second weighting approach is weighting by historical win rate across different segments. Instead of applying one blanket probability per stage, you look at how close win rates differ by deal type, deal size, or lead source. Maybe your win rate on deals under 50K is 25%, but your win rate on enterprise deals over 200K is only 10%. Maybe deals that come in through inbound marketing closes at 30%, but outbound prospecting deals close at 12%. When you apply those actual rates instead of a single stage number, the forecast gets a lot more honest. You start to see which parts of your pipeline are genuinely strong and which parts are more speculative. The third one is time decay weighting, and this is the one that most companies completely skip, even though it might be the most valuable. The idea is that a deal that has been sitting at the same stage for 60 days is not worth the same as a deal that moved into that stage last week. Momentum matters in sales. If a deal is not progressing, the probability of it actually closing drops with every passing week. Some companies build this right into their CRM with automated rules. If a deal has not had any activity in 30 days, the probability gets cut in half. If it has not moved stages in 60 days, it gets flagged for review or pulled out of the pipeline entirely. That kind of pipeline hygiene is what separates a forecast you can trust from a wish list. Once you have an honest, weighted pipeline number, the next question is whether it's big enough. And that's where the pipeline coverage ratio comes in. The math is simple. You take your total weighted pipeline value and divide it by your revenue target for the period. The general rule of thumb that most sales organizations use is that you want somewhere between 3 times and 4 times coverage. So if your quarterly revenue target is $500K, you want to be looking at 1.5 to 2 million in weighted pipeline to feel confident about hitting that number. The reason you need that much buffer and not just a 1-to-1 ratio is because deals fall out. That is just the nature of sales. Prospects go dark, budgets get cut internally, timelines slip, a champion leaves the company. All of those things happen consistently, and the coverage ratio is your safety net against that reality. If your coverage is only 1.5 times, you basically need almost everything in the pipeline to close in order to hit your target, and that almost never happens. Now, there's an important nuance here. If you are calculating coverage against an unweighted pipeline, the ratio needs to be much higher to mean anything, because that raw number is inflated with all the air we talked about earlier. This is why the weighting has to come first. You weight the pipeline honestly, then you check coverage against that weighted number. A 3x ratio on a properly weighted pipeline is much more reliable than a 5x ratio on an unweighted pipeline. And this is where the bridge to financial planning gets really important. If you are running a SaaS company and your coverage ratio is sitting at 2x going into the third quarter, that does not just mean you might miss your revenue target. It means the billings and cash collections you were counting on for Q4 might not materialize the way you expected. And that means the payroll, the marketing spend, the infrastructure investments you planned around that revenue might not have the cash behind them when you need it. This is the connection between sales metrics and actual financial health. And it's the same thread we've been following since the very first video in the series. So you've got your velocity number, your weighting, and your coverage ratio. But even with good math, the output is only as reliable as the data going in. So let me walk you through 3 specific things I look for when I'm trying to figure out whether a pipeline is being honest. The first one is what we call the push rate. Every deal in your pipeline has an expected close date. When that date arrives and the deal is not closed, the rep pushes it out, moves it to next month or next quarter. That by itself is not unusual. Deals slip for legitimate reasons all the time. But when you look at the pattern across the entire pipeline and you see that 40 or 50% of deals are getting pushed every single month, that's a problem. It means the pipeline is full of deals that are not actually progressing on the timeline the team is projecting. And that means your forecast is systematically too optimistic. It is baked into the way deals are being managed, and it'll keep happening until someone addresses it. The second one is deal aging. If you have deals that have been sitting at the proposal stage for 90 days, and your average time for proposal to close is 30 days, those are not real opportunities anymore. Something has stalled. Maybe the prospect is evaluating competitors. Maybe the budget got frozen internally. Or maybe the champion left. Whatever the reason, a deal that has been at that stage for 3 times the normal duration has a very low probability of closing. But it's still in the pipeline, still contributing to that headline number, still making the forecast look healthier than it actually is. A good rule of thumb is that if a deal has been at any stage for more than twice the average time for that stage, it should get flagged. Either the rep goes back and requalifies it with a concrete next step and real timeline, or it comes off the pipeline. The third one is more subtle, and that is the stage skip rate. This is when a deal jumps from, say, discovery straight to proposal, without going through qualification or scoping in between. When that happens, it usually means one of 2 things. Either the sales process is not being followed consistently, or the deal is being fast-tracked by a rep who is trying to move it along without doing proper vetting. Both of those increase the risk of deals falling apart later in the process. The data on this is pretty clear. Deals that skip stages tend to close at significantly lower rates than deals that move through each step of the process properly. And if you are weighting by stage probability, a deal that jumped to the proposal stage without actually being scoped properly should not be getting the same probability as one that earned its way there through the full process. So here's the process in full. You take your pipeline, you weight it using actual historical data, not guesses. You check the coverage ratio against your revenue target, and you pressure test the individual deals using push rate, deal aging, and stage skip rate. What you end up with is a forecast that is grounded in math and real pipeline behavior, not just optimism. In practice, what this looks like is building out 3 scenarios: a best case, an expected case, and worst case. Your best case assumes that your win rate holds steady and your cycle times stay on track. Your worst case assumes that the stale deals and the ones that have been pushed multiple times fall out entirely. And your expected case is the weighted number with the honesty checks applied. That range between worst and best is your real planning window. So for example, if you are running a consulting firm and your weighted pipeline for the next quarter comes to $800K, but you can see that about 30% of those deals have been pushed at least once, you might build a worst case of around $500K and a best case of around $900. That $500,000 to $900,000 range is significantly more useful for making hiring decisions, managing cash flow, and planning your capacity than the raw $2 million pipeline number that was floating around in the team meeting. And for a SaaS company, you take it one step further by layering in what we covered in the last couple of videos. That weighted pipeline becomes bookings when the deals actually close. Those bookings become billings based on your invoicing schedule, and the billings become cash based on your collection terms and how quickly customers actually pay. So a $500,000 expected case in bookings for next quarter might translate to $300K in billings during that same period, and maybe $200K in actual cash collected. That cash number is what your finance team and your treasury function need to be planning around, not the $2 million headline, and not even the $500K bookings estimate. The companies that do this well, the ones that consistently hit their forecasts within 10%, are not necessarily better at selling than anyone else. They are better at the math. They wait honestly, they clean the pipeline frequently, and they plan around the realistic number instead of the aspirational one. So the next time someone tells you the pipeline is sitting at $2 million, ask 3 questions. What's the weighted value? What is our coverage ratio against target? And how many of those deals have been pushed more than once? Because the answer to those 3 questions will tell you more about where your quarter is headed than the headline number ever will. If this was useful, please subscribe. I'm building out a library of content like this, breaking down the financial mechanics behind how businesses actually run. Not theory, but the stuff that shows up in real pipeline reviews, real board meetings, and real conversations between founders and their finance teams. Next time, we are getting into health metrics that matter most for recurring revenue businesses: ARR, MRR, churn, and net revenue retention. If you've ever heard an investor or an acquirer ask about these 3 numbers and you weren't totally sure how they all connect, this one's for you. See you next time.